Well, we have 10 minutes for discussion of this paper, starting with Monsignor Sanchez. Perdón.
Congratulations, Jeff, because you put us always very important questions. And the first one is, I want to say to you that the economy, also the etymology, as you know perfectly in Greek, come from the economos, so house, the economy born in the family, because the family needs to administrate things. That is the question, to administrate the goods. So this is the second question that you put the first time in this meeting, and this central, is the question of education, because the meaning of the family is education, procreation, but include education. St. Augustine, Aristotle, St. Thomas Aquinas. So is real fundamental your paper. Thank you very much. That is my comment.
First, Virgilio, first, and...
Fantastic, very good. Oh, thank you. Yes, congratulations, very good. But I was a little bit disturbed in a way because the main message from your presentation is that as the economy changes over time, family structures change accordingly. And in a way, since the economy will continue to change, how are families going to be in the future? So my question to you is, how could we, in a way, forecast the economy, which it's your job as an economist, and it's not an easy thing to do, to forecast what's going to happen with the economy. But on the basis of that, forecast what families would tend to look like, and in a way design a strategy to promote more efficient functioning of the family, or more harmonious, more full of love, full of care, and full of education, as Marcelo pointed out. So how to think in this dynamic world over time, and also how to think that with the complexity of diversity that our Zulu colleague pointed out so well. So we have that picture of former slave communities compared to non-educated families, as Robert pointed out. So we have that complexity as well. So how to deal with this?
Yes, Aristotle started with oikos and started with the household, and from there the ecology and the economy emerge. But it's interesting, as much as I completely love Aristotle, and I do, he couldn't imagine a society in which all children were educated. In Athens, in 340 AD, there was a landed class and there were slaves. And it was the slaves that enabled the education. And that he had to even justify that there would be natural slaves in that context. And also he regarded women not as objects for education, but as part of the household, but not for education. We see this differently, and our goal is not a small educated elite, but somehow a world in which everybody has an opportunity to participate fully, with dignity, developing all of their capacities. And I marvel at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which put education as a fundamental human right. And it's a fundamental human right because it says that all people are created in dignity And part of the human dignity is the ability to have an education. To my mind, this is the soundest forecast about the future of the family. That job is not going away. What do we mean by an education? Well, I think there we should turn back to Aristotle also, because we mean not only the subjects you would learn in the Lyceum, but moral education as fundamental, and as socialization as fundamental, and as psychosocial health as fundamental. And so our job as parents is to help our children find that full life. That is tricky, because that's more of an investment by far than parents made 2 centuries ago. 2 centuries ago, parents would maybe have the child come on the farm and watch the farming, and then by age 7 or 8, they would start to do the chores, and by age 15, if they could, they would, depending on the context, move away or something else. We're stuck with our kids for 20 years plus. Of course, I love it, but this is a long process, and it's a very rich one, extraordinarily rewarding. But that's the investment that is, I think, needed for this complicated world. And I think what we see in Bob's data is how hard that is. And when I look at other places in the world, there are hundreds of millions of kids not even in school, period. I mean primary school, secondary school, not at all. What are they going to do in 10 years, in 20 years? How are they going to survive? What's going to happen? Will they drown in the bottom of the Mediterranean as they try to make a desperate crossing to find a job someplace? And we're not clever enough to understand, my God, why aren't we making this investment? It's not so much, by the way, I've spent a lifetime trying to put the cost on getting every child in school. Just from a financial point of view, maybe it's $50 billion a year. Maybe it's 100 billion extra. Elon Musk came up with that in 10 minutes. And I always like to give the denominator. We produce $100 trillion a year of output. So 100 billion among friends is 0.1% of our output. We can't mobilize that to get our kids in school everywhere. This should be the most basic, simple commitment. Help families to help educate their children everywhere so they're prepared for the future. That should be the most basic point that we do. And as parents, I would say, take into account what education properly means, the full proper education of teaching about the world, teaching about human values, and enabling the cognitive development.
Thank you. I would appreciate short questions and, if possible, short answers. So, listen, so please.
Thank you, Professor. Just one question. Now you speak about the function, the economical function of the family. I think that we can say also, as a consequence of your speech, that the family is the proto-enterprise, because we cannot have any family without organization, without management, and without professionality, and these elements can be met in a family. But do you think that one of the reasons for which we do not have the consideration of the investment of these investments depends also on the modality of measuring the GBT? Because I think that this is one of the reasons. For example, if you do not consider the the well-being, yes, the well-being created in the family, which has economical value, it will be very difficult also to appreciate what the family the function of the family. So, if you can give me your opinion about this issue. Thank you.
It's a wonderful observation. We don't have in the GDP and in our budgets a capital account properly. So education is considered a cost, not an investment. We also have in GDP a static slice at a moment of time. It is not a measure of future well-being. It's not a measure of investment in our children or the future of society. It notoriously counts capital depletion as income. So if you chop down a tree, that's income. If you leave it standing, that is a loss of income by natural standard accounting. But there's no measure in GDP of whether your child's being educated and what the future productive potential of your children is. So I want to think about how to express that better, but it's a very important observation.
I'm going to start balancing the questions for Jeffrey and the questions that we left for the other speakers, because we are moving to the general discussion time. First, Stefano.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. I have three different remarks. The first one is the following. What Virgilio said in his question, I have a follow-up. He says, is it the case that we should accept that the family should follow the evolution of the economic structure, and why not vice versa? Now, as you perhaps know, paragraph 67 of Gaudium et Spes, which was published in 1965, says exactly that. It is the productive process which should adapt itself to the lifestyle of people and to the family, not vice versa. Because it is obvious that we know technological change, they impose upon a family a sort of a blackmail. Either you family adapt yourself to the new necessity, or you are just going to starve. And even the education, of course, they need education, but which type of education? Is the education should be functional only to the new needs, or vice versa? That is, I say so because there is a precedent. You know it. The debate at the time at the first industrial revolution in England. The debate was between Adam Smith, or the Smithian, and David Ricardo. As you know, David Ricardo, who was a man, a practical man, said there is no need to send the children to school. He wrote that because with the new industrial revolution, the new division of labor, provided that people, workers, are able to hammer, etc., there is no need for them to think. Adam Smith, who was, on the other hand, a professor of moral philosophy, said, no, because of the industrial revolution, we need to put to school everybody, but not for 1 year, for many years, because otherwise there is the risk of alienation. Because if you follow the progress and you do not counterpart, the risk of alienation is obvious. And as we know, the winner was David Ricardo, because in Westminster Parliament, he was very able, and the Smith already passed away, but this follower, or Adam Smith, thought that they lost the battle. And so what is today is, in a new version, exactly the same debate. Should we accept that education should be functional to the new needs, artificial intelligence, artificial conscience, because we are approaching artificial conscience, as you know, or we should counteract that, operating with a model of education such that we at least obtain a compensation. That is, and finally, you said the care economy. As you know, this is our fault of our profession, because if there is a category of thought that never entered into economics as a discipline, is the notion of care. Because the economy says care is a business of psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, but economics has nothing to do with it. So it is obvious that the very moment we want to talk about the care economy, we have to change the paradigm, because otherwise with the mainstream, we cannot progress any longer. I don't know if you agree with that. Thank you.
Jeffrey, if you want. Okay, good.
I want to reinforce this very point about undervaluing care. The graph you showed of the changing composition of the workforce and how much of, or how little of it is devoted to care was a function of the fact that what you were showing was paid workforce. It dramatically underestimated the amount of investment that is currently going on, and in the future I think will be even more likely to go on, in an unpaid way. If you valued the work that my wife or my daughter or occasionally even I am doing to provide care, and at the value that the rich folks now clearly are, they're the ones who have they're paying a ton more for the care of their kids than the lower two-thirds can. And it's just another way of saying, I think conventional economics focused on the market value is tremendously underestimating. I'm just repeating what you've said, but in an empirical way.
Yes, I'm very, very quick and very precise. At least I hope so. So, referring to the slide which is called Economics and Family Structure, I missed the inclusion of men. So you are talking about female labor force participation. You said from high to moderate, which I don't know why you do this, to the digital age. Yeah, well, this is at least, I mean, I even have a photo from this. But I wonder what you think will be the case with fathers. And I also thought that you probably mentioned that care is transforming from care by mothers only to joint care or to father's care even. So this is relating to this first slide. And the second question well refers to the point which were just taken. Given the huge increase of the caring industry, child care, elderly care, continuous education, even education is a form of care, and demographic change, as we heard this morning, and migration, as we just heard from Marcelo, of course means not just, as you just pointed out, that we have a division within one nation between those with and those without education, but also huge international care chains, so that we import care and we, by them, leaving behind children for hiring women from other countries, taking the care of our elderly people, but also increasingly for our children.
Just a few very quick points on, because all of these points are extremely important. GDP does not measure what we want to measure for well-being. This, I think, is a basic point. I had the privilege to be a young student when the founder of GDP, Simon Kuznets, was an emeritus professor at Harvard. And I used to go over to his house in the afternoons, and he hammered home to me, this is not a measure of well-being. This is a measure of the size of the economy that was made first for war planning. So the reason GDP accounts were first designed after 1919 was that when they tried to mobilize for World War I in the United States, they had no idea how big the economy was. and how to think about how much could be mobilized. So Kuznets was part of the first attempt to measure the size of the economy for future war planning. Then came the Great Depression and Keynes' ideas, and that led to a second motivation for national income accounts, which was for macroeconomic stabilization. But it was never meant to be a measure of well-being. And we have lost track of that basic point forever since the beginning. It became the shorthand for well-being, profoundly flawed on ecological grounds, on intertemporal grounds, and on justice grounds, because it doesn't measure inequality, it doesn't measure environmental catastrophe, and it doesn't look to the future. So in all of these ways, it's a very bad measure. There are lots of ways to partly clean it up, and there are also ways just to look and measure more directly well-being. And I'm in favor of the latter to an important extent, because we have many different measures of well-being, of thriving, of subjective well-being by self-report, and many other things that we can look at that should be added to the paradigm. Let me say just a word about the technological change that is underway. I think it's very deep and really now several hundred years old, but accelerating, that machines replace human physical or human activity. For a long time it was physical, now it's cognitive. What do we want to make of that fact? I don't think that it's something that we can say, well, we'll not do this, you know, that's not a good idea. It's in a way too deep for that. The process of better and smarter machines, going back to James Watt's steam engine onward, is a pervasive phenomenon. It gives the chance to do something extremely important, and that is to increase our well-being if we distribute the benefits properly. And it really gives the chance for more, I'll say leisure, but leisure in the Greek sense, more time for thinking, culture, learning, social interaction, because the machines can do potentially a lot of the drudgery. There's nothing wrong with the machines doing all the agricultural work if we adjust it properly. Agricultural work is toil, we know from the Bible. It's hard, it was punishment, and it is grueling. And having spent, I can't even admit it, it's so ridiculous, but just one part of one day in weeding with a farmer in Western Kenya. She was 75 and she does it every day. I could barely stand up after about 3 hours of it. It's grueling work. If that were mechanized and there were good alternatives of the use of the time saved in a fair way, that's what we want in society. What we're not thinking about is the fairness part. The way the economy is working right now is that it's bizarre. It's completely broken the social contract, because Elon Musk really does have $250 billion at his disposal. A normal world would not be like this. I just looked. The richest 9 Americans today have $1.2 trillion of wealth. 9 people. And they don't have a care about anything that we're talking about, by the way. Not even a glimmer of concern. I know all of them. A couple care a little bit, not very much. And so that's how the economy functions in the way our markets work, and the absence of any kind of public policy to steer the gains in a more just way. But let me just say that rather than smashing the machines, which was, of course, the proposal of the Luddites in the 1820s when they wanted to take away the power looms, we have better ways to say, let the machines be smart, but let the humans be even more clever and more fair. And so if we have a just way to govern society, to tax, to transfer, to ensure universal access of services and benefits, to help every child get a good start in life, we'll actually end up with more quality time in our lives if we use this the right way. But this is not how the issue is viewed primarily, except in technical terms, universal basic income or something like that. Well, that could be a tool, but we should look more deeply at what we're after, which is eudaimonia, using the tools that we have at our hand and using the political instruments that we have. I'm going to stop, but just to say, I don't want to stop the technology advance. I want to harness it consciously for better outcomes. And I think that it's possible to do that.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate your words. At the same time, I think I'm making a lot of enemies because I have Gustavo and Monsignor Mineras waiting for some questions, but perhaps we have the opportunity to speak about them over the dinner because there is no time left for the... Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Oh, great. No, I'm very happy about that. I just was looking at the schedule. So please, Gustavo, you have the floor.
Thank you again. Thank you, Jeffrey. As usual, you have been opening our minds and inspiring a lot of new ideas and feeding our imagination. I would like to emphasize the importance of the CCTs, the conditional cash transfers, are a very successful experience in Latin America. They was born at the beginning of this century, of course, under the umbrella of the commodities boom, but the empirical evidence is showing us in a cost-effect empirical evidence that they are accountable for at least 30% of the filling the gap of the inequality gap in Latin America. So it has been working very well, at least at the first 15 years of our century. And I would like to listen from you some ideas about how we could be able of rethinking the conditional cash transfers. Because on one hand, the families has the duty of vaccinate the children, and on the other hand, they have the duty of sending children to school. But in my humble opinion, the kind of education that the most vulnerable groups of people needs nowadays are completely different from the beginning of the century. We have to think about the digital alphabetization, shortening the period of elemental and even secondary education, and relating the strategy again through a concept of digital care. Digital care has two folds. On one hand, you have the importance of digital alphabetization, and on the other hand, you have the importance of taking care of the exposure of the children to the social networks, which is extremely important from the mental health problem. So in very few words, I would like to listen from you some ideas about how to renew the CCTs, taking into account that our colleague from South Africa mentioned the colonialism. I was reading at the airplane when I was coming here, one of the most important magazines of technology in the world, Wired, is talking about artificial intelligence colonialism, the misuse of our personal data in order to deepen the inequalities of our world.
Do you want to? Oh. Okay, Monsignor Mineras, and then we can go back. Well, but he was first. Yes, and then Rocco.
I had a question for Professor Zulu, but he's not here, so.
Good. Then Rocco, Allen, and Vicenzo had a question for Vittorio.
Thank you. I also had a question to Professor Zulu, but I have also one to Jeffrey, or more than one. First of all, thank you very much, Jeffrey. I think, Monsignore, somebody should tell to the Holy Father that to speak about tierra, techo, trabajo is very good, but the real capital today is knowledge. The center of the process of reduction of poverty, the struggle against poverty, passes through the spreading of knowledge. But education is central. But I think we must be very careful in the way in which we consider this. One of the reasons of the crisis of the family, I think, is that in the past, the education was centered in the family. There was the transmission of knowledge took place within the family. The father was at the same time the professor. Then we have had a period in which there was a tremendous shift, and the father and the mother, of course, the mother even more than the father, have lost prestige in front of the children because they did not manage the new kind of knowledge that was needed in order to be able to work. Now, we have a generation, in many countries at least, a generation that has a certain level of knowledge and that can be useful in the process of the children of learning about what should be done to have a job. How can we reinsert the family in this process? Because I think it is extremely negative to leave the family aside, to give the children just to an institution called the state school, and they will make of them men ready to work. The values of the family that are useful not only in order to work, but also in order to become true women and true men, run the risk of being lost. So we have to manage this very carefully. A second stage of the same problem is that there is an enormous amount of traditional knowledge, traditional wisdom, that runs the risk of going lost. I come from Italy, I'm Italian. In Italy, we have an enormous patrimony of light technology, technology that perhaps you do not learn in college, technology that you learn in a professional school in which these skills are transmitted. And they are skills that regard, most of all, beauty. You can buy a table on which you can eat in any part of the world, but if you want to add beauty, you better go to Tuscany or to Puglia, my personal region. And not only that, there are a lot of I think of Amazonas. There is an enormous quantity of traditional wisdom that needs to be categorized, that needs to be helped, but that can be transmitted only by those who have it. I give you one example. You speak about agriculture. In Italy, we don't have 1% working on agriculture, a much higher percentage. Why? Because it is less developed? No, because it is an agriculture centered on quality. In order to make Franciacorta, I hope everybody of you knows what is Franciacorta, it's the best wine in the world. In order to make Franciacorta, you need an enormous quantity of specialized work concentrated on a few acres of land. So there is also a case in which you have a transmission of knowledge, mainly through the family. Of course, it needs to be upgraded. It needs to work together with the university, but you cannot give it just only to the university. And one other point I wish to make is, let's move to the 19th century. Leo XIII spoke about family salary. He was convinced that the husband should be able, with his work, to support the family. Of course, we are all against it because it seems to be willing to leave the woman at home. But there is one point that I think is extremely important today. With 40, 50 hours per week, the two would support the family, and they had time for their children. Today, in order to support their children, they have to work 80 or 100 hours, or perhaps even more. So it seems that they are having a much higher salary. But as a matter of fact, they have to work both together, and the time of the family is dramatically restricted. So there is also a problem of level of wages. And the last point, this is a problem that has presented itself in different ways in different parts of the world. But in many countries, we have pension system in which we pay the pensions of our parents, and our children will pay our pensions. Those who have no children should have not a duty of solidarity, but of justice to pay for the children. Because the children, my children, that have been raised with my money, will pay their pension. And they have been much richer than me throughout our life, because with the same level of income, they could afford a lot of luxuries I could not afford.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether you want to answer now or... Okay, good. Yes, Mineras has, Paulus has come back, so...
I had a question for you, Paulus. Maybe it brings us too long, but listening to your presentation with much care, you insisted that the individual and the collective are one. Huh? I can understand that very well, because I think in cultures of India or China, you have that same scheme. But my question was, how do you receive the social doctrine of the Church, which is built on Western philosophy of Aristotle, Aquinas, putting the person at the center of the whole building? The person, okay, is a social being, and the common good has to be reached by each person in the community. But there is a difference, I think, in saying collectivity and person and individual are the same thing. Then, when you start from the person, is there a problem with receiving this discourse in the culture of South Africa, for instance?
No, I don't think there is a disjuncture in the two. Before the individual can make a contribution, he has to be, or she has to be. And I don't think the philosophies of Africa negate the importance of the individual. What they emphasize is that although the individual is, the individual also has to share his or her individualism with the others. I think that's where the emphasis is lost. If the philosophies negated completely the existence of the individual, and the individual got lost in the collectivity, then there wouldn't be a question of even recognizing the existence of individuals qua individual. That's my understanding of it. There isn't a disjuncture. I think the Western philosophies, the Aristotelian, etc., tend to emphasize the centrality of the individual in everything, whereas we recognize the existence, the being of the individual, but in the context of the collective. You wouldn't in other words, an individual can't exist alone.
A question, just a second. Because I have a friend from Kenya. She told me once that she was in Europe for a long time, and she went back to Kenya, and she asked her mother, how many cousins, or how many we are? And her mother told her, Antoinette, we don't count persons. And I took that as a very interesting point, because you don't make statistics, or you are not concerned about numbers or persons as numbers. Each one has an individual name, or each one is unique. So for me, perhaps I made a Kantian reading of that sentence, but it was an indirect way of recognizing the uniqueness of each person in spite of being in a web of relationships. So I don't know whether you agree with that.
I think we have to appraise this in the context of African practices, and I'll sort of be narrative and empirical. When a traditional family cooks, it takes into account that it's not only the people who are present at that particular moment in the house that must be catered for. In the event a visitor comes, the visitor is also, it's not known that the visitor is coming. In the event, there is even a saying, a proverb, isisu somhambi asingakanani singangenzo yenyoni. The stomach of a visitor is not anything. It's as small as the kidney of a bird. In other words, by just a little bit that you add and to cater for others, you cater for the collective. So there is this belief that we can't exist in isolation. We only exist, yes, we are members, we are units, but we are units in a collective. Individually, we cannot make it.
And also, Pope Francis is emphasizing the importance of Fratelli Tutti.
I proceed because I have several questions.
Yeah, but I think what we also have to take into account is that this culture developed, I can't say in the pre-economic, in the pre-modern economic era, when units of production really did not matter. There was always enough for everybody.
Well, I have several questions, but well, I don't know. I am lost already. Perhaps, Alan, you forgot your own question. No? Okay, good.
You know, in a way, as I was listening to Professor Putnam's presentation and Jeffrey Sachs and many of the others about the enormous gap in opportunity, the infrastructure of opportunity, as Fiona Hill calls it, for working class kids, poor kids versus affluent, well-educated kids throughout the world. In a way, academics are part of the problem. Because if we're going to prepare children for an information economy, the modern university is a very inefficient way to do that. It's expensive, it takes too long. And so in a sense, we need to be thinking about how to prepare young people for the information economy, for the knowledge economy, who are not going to go to college and shouldn't go to college because they're going to just end up in debt without actually the skills. And so in a way, it's a critique of ourselves as academics. I mean, in the sense that we've benefited from a system in which we're the gatekeepers for that ticket to middle class flourishing. And it's very inefficient. It's not working well for the 2/3 in this country, in the United States, and for many times that around the world.
Good point. There was Monsignor Schallenberg and Rocco and Helen. And Helen. Okay, good. Yeah, sorry.
First, you. My point is very short. It's connecting with the first point of Rocco about education. So thank you, Jeff, for your contribution. We are discussing in Germany the danger also of economic colonization by education. So at the beginning of education, when should begin the education of the youngsters? With 1 year, with 2 years? The so-called kindergarten is already seen as a formation institute for children. And then we have not only the economic argument, but also the migration argument. So for avoiding ghettos, we need as early as possible institutions for the children, for integrate them in the society. So what do you think about this problem? Because historically it was very, very discussed, for instance, in Germany, in Bavaria, the introducing of schools. And in Great Britain we have the homeschooling, and it's unthinkable to have it in Germany. But now we are, as Catholics, we are for education. 200 years ago it was devil's work to have state education.
Okay, please, Rocco and Vicente, well, it was, okay, and Helen, yeah.
Professor Zulu, I don't think we should make a strong opposition of the African and the European point of view. Because if you go to Aristotle, it is clear. Aristotle says clearly that the good of the community is higher and more divine than the good of the individual. So it stands for the community. It's St. Thomas who, commenting Aristotle, says homo pertinetat societatem politicam, pero non secundum se totum. Man belongs to the political community, but not all of man. That is, there is man something that transcends the political community. And this has been a central point in political philosophy. In the years between the two wars, there was a great philosopher, Otmar Spann, who wanted the Catholic Church to support National Socialism, that proposed the teaching of Aristotle. And there was another great philosopher, he has a cause of beatification in course, Giorgio Lapira, who said, no, that's the point of view of the Greeks, of course. They had the slavery, for them, the community is all. But It is not the Christian point of view. It is not even the point of view of Socrates. Socrates, in his clash with the laws of Athens, tells to the laws of Athens, I am ready to obey to you in everything, but on one point. And this one point is the recognition of truth, the moment in which the individual transcends the community. I think it is an African problem, but I think it is at the same time a European problem, an American problem, a problem of all our societies, to recognize the rights of the community, but the person stands higher than the community and transcends the community, cannot exist without the community, but transcends the community.
And yes, Helen, and perhaps Vittorio wants to answer.
Thank you very much. So I would like to pick up a few points quickly. First of all, Jeffrey said, in GDP, education is regarded as a cost and not as an investment. But presumably in GDP, investment is recognized. So why can't we just move education from cost to investment? I mean, this would be a very simple change, which would improve our measurement. You know, this could be one of the things we say at the end of our meeting. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we've said some things about technology, and I think this is very important. We've said other things about technology in other meetings. Again, I would see this question about the way technology is forcing the family or the natural world to conform to its structures as about something similar to what I was discussing with Bob during the lunch break, the way in which the economic mindset has become the social philosophy. So everything works on markets. Everything is about purely financial efficiency. And so technology is also about that, but technology could be designed in a different way. You know, the way I always say this to the students, and that is, if Mark Zuckerberg said to the engineers in Facebook and now in Meta, I want you to design an interface which enhances human dignity and also makes us money, they would do it. They would be happy to do it. They could do it, it would be possible. But he doesn't say that to them. So, you know, it's a question of courage and lack of motivation. If we could put those two things right, we could change the way technology is being developed. It could become much more human-centered. We could have a big meeting about this. The Holy See the Secretary of State now has a coordinating group working on technology. So we should put some input into that meeting, and we should have a big encyclical about it in a few years from Pope Francis. Okay, so next point is, I think it was very interesting what you said, Rocco, about education and the family. Coming back, family is a sort of educational structure that shouldn't be excluded from the educational system. It made me think about a Dutch-Australian thinker who's done a lot of work on welfare systems in Van Kersbergen, his name is, welfare systems in countries that were dominated by Christian democratic parties, showing that they put the family as a more important structure in the welfare system. Whereas countries like my own, Britain, the National Health Service and the welfare system that's set up after the Second World War is very socialist and it's very individualist focused. In the seedy countries, they spend about the same money, but they spend it in a different way. The quality is different. And so that's quite an interesting element, I think, to go alongside the educational question here. The family as a more integral framework in social policy, in welfare, in education, and then also in technological development. You know, we could start to think about this in a sort of trans-systemic way. I'm very glad that you said those things about Aquinas and Aristotle, because I think that's right. They do put the common good first. But I think the thing about the Catholic social thought is it's dealing with liberalism. It's trying to find a way to talk to the liberal system that had emerged when Catholic social teaching is founded, that's drawing on that tradition, but is kind of trying to meet it somewhere. Hence why it becomes much more focused, I think, on the person, but it's not negating what happened before. It's just a question of shifting of gravity to try to meet these people that are being talked to. I think it should be explained in historical terms, that change. Last thing, I thought that was very interesting, the point of Alan. You may know that in European University Association now, they have a big project on micro-credentials. And I think micro-credentials is a very, very important way of trying to deal with the problem you're talking about. On the other hand, I would also say, to some extent, universities have been asked to do things they're not really very good at doing. And that's coming back to a bit what Rocco was saying, that we need to have other kinds of education. This system in Italy of the mestiere is really, really important, and it's training people. Of course, Germany is fantastic for this. It's training people in a different kind of way, and the universities can't do that very well. We shouldn't be asking them to do it. But I think the micro-credential thing is a very, very important response to that. Thank you.
Well, I think we are almost done. We have just 1 minute left, and perhaps, Vittorio, you want to talk with Vincenzo about his question? Oh, 1 minute, okay. We have 2 minutes. I will be counting.
Yeah, I had to answer your question and Elizabeth's question. Certainly, children have rights. The fact is that they cannot defend themselves in front of courts, so usually the parents are supposed to do that. But there are cases where the parents prove to be incapable to do that, and in this case, even if prima facie the responsibility rests with the parents, states have to come in. And there's, of course, a big gray zone. When should they step in? I can tell you what a very important German constitutional court decision was. Not only in the case in which parents violate their duties deliberately through violence, sexual crimes, even if they're not responsible for not being able to fulfill the welfare of the children, according to the decision of a constitutional court, the state can take the children away. A classical example was handicapped parents, mentally handicapped parents, have a child that is not mentally handicapped. The psychologist says the child will be impeded in its development if it stays with the handicapped children. That is sufficient to take the child away from the parents, because the welfare of the child is considered as the more important good than the legitimate right of the parents to have their own children. And I support this decision. And the second question of Elizabeth was, yes, she is right. Mary Wollstonecraft, I depicted it too unilaterally when I said she wants women to become very male. She thinks that there is one moral set of virtues and values for both sexes. And it's identical. So you can say, on the one hand, women should more control their emotions, but men should also become more caring. What Mary Wollstonecraft does not do is what we have in another current of feminism, the idea that men and women are radically different. The central idea is men and women should be ultimately follow the same moral principles. So thank you.
Thank you, Vittorio. And then Jeff?
Wonderful comments. I unfortunately I wouldn't be able to and don't have the time to answer all of them in detail, but very quickly, there will be a global summit on the future of education at the UN in September. We should think a little bit about that beforehand. It also aligns with Pope Francis's Global Pact for Education. So he's calling for a new pact, and I think our discussion feeds well into that and into the global discussion as well. I think the idea of engaging the family centrally in the education process is extremely important, valuable, and raises lots of questions about how to do it. It can be done at the school level. Parents also can be part of education, because even digitally, we now have ways to just have continuing education in more organized ways than was true in the past, and more feasible in the past. So I think the idea of education, engaging the parents through curriculum and process and use of digital and other things is really a very important idea and a very good one. And it raises all sorts of thoughts about what that could mean. Also, the idea of new kind of university is absolutely correct that the U.S. model is pay $60,000 a year for a university, and a great part of that could be made available online for free, and with creativity, blended models at much lower cost. And I took that idea to Columbia University, and I was told resolutely, that does not fit our business model. So it raises all sorts of questions that I think are relevant, but we're trying an almost all free online university for African students together with the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco. So experiments should be done to open this process up very widely. In terms of the question, how early is early education? The evidence actually is that early education is really good idea. And so age 3, age 4, really positive results from psychosocial, cognitive, behavioral. The evidence actually seems to be very strong. Now, how that works out and how to do it is another matter, but I think there's a good, strong case for that. But again, I really like the idea of engaging the family in a creative way in that process as part of doing that. So it's not just shipping the kids out and collecting them back at the end of the day, but something more creative than that. Conditional cash transfers, I'm all in. How to make sure that they have the right content for the new period is right, but I think they prove to be a very powerful tool. And in general, on the digital question and data colonization and so forth, we don't have the use cases developed for the good social uses of the digital technologies. We don't have the good use case for online education components or healthcare components. And this is a role for government, actually, again, finding the good use cases and then ensuring universal access. Because the digital divide is not, it's not something that is a physical obstacle even. Almost everybody is within reach of wireless broadband now in the whole world, about 90+%. It's a financial issue. It's a business model issue. It's to an extent a device issue, but even the devices are so inexpensive now, $50 or $100 for a low-cost tablet or smartphone, that we could overcome the digital divide at a very small cost. That's something, again, that big tech should do almost automatically as a requirement, because otherwise we'll drift apart for, again, no good reasons at all.
Thank you, everybody, for this splendid session. Thank you to all the speakers and the commenters.